joining me today for a discussion on PCI DSS 3.2 standards. This presentation will be an introduction to PCI DSS compliance. PCI does have many levels of compliance, but we're going to focus today on DSS. Our agenda for today is what is DSS and the history, impact of some credit card theft and fraud, and what is the PCI Security Councils. Do you have to comply? Is it you? How to govern compliance. And I'm going to get into some common issues that people have run into that over my career I have run into. Now you must be thinking, well, why me? Who am I? Well, I'm a certified information security and technology professional. I have been in technology over 25 years, and I've crossed multiple industries. I've developed extensive leadership and hands-on experience architecting solutions, developing strategies, implementing policies and procedures for mitigating risk of cyber threat, and I manage risk and compliance. Currently, I'm an independent security consultant. I work with a variety of clients providing advisory services, creating strategic plans and audits. Previously, I was Director of Information Security at PepsiCo and Manager of ERP Services at Deloitte & Touche. So I have been around for quite some time. So I'm going to start here with the PCI and the history of PCI. PCI, Security Standards Council, is a global organization, and it involves the promotion of credit card holder data standards and safety across the globe. When you think about PCI and how it was founded by the big credit cards: Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, at JBL International. When this was found several years ago, basically these big brand credit cards kind of got sick of the breaches that were happening. The credit card companies were designed to take small theft. So somebody takes your card and uses it inappropriately to buy an item. The big credit card companies were set up to handle that kind of fraud. The credit card companies were not set up for the large multi-million-dollar breaches that have been going on. And it is a very, very serious problem. Almost 11 billion records with sensitive information have been breached between 2005 and 2018. So something had to be done about this. And when I say that the big credit card companies got really sick and tired of the breaches that were happening, here are some examples of where they were really had it. Heartland Payment Systems had 130 million cards exposed. This is the largest breach to date. And even though it happened several years ago, they are still calculating how much this cost. TJX Companies, that is a large retailer owning TJ Maxx and Marshalls, had 94 million cards breached in 2006. This caused a loss to Visa and MasterCard of almost $83 million, spread across multiple countries. So you could see that this is a problem that is spread across the globe, and something has to be done about it. Home Depot lost 56 million cards, and their breach was due to a unique custom-built malware that infected their systems and exposed all their credit card data. And Target, on 2013 Black Friday weekend, was breached and lost 40 million cards. This started getting closer to our time of the breach, where people were not accepting the fact that their credit cards were breached. Not only are the big companies getting sick and tired of the breaches, so are people. So the PCI Security Standards Council is an independent company. It's a corporation that was founded by the big credit card companies. It does operate as a separate entity. And PCI is chartered with three things: provide the framework for security policies and technologies that protect their payment system from breaches and theft of credit cards. The PCI DSS standard defines the scope for the cardholder data environment. And the cardholder data environment are all of the systems, all of the people, and all of the processes and technology that touch the cardholder data. There is nothing excluded from that. If it touches the data at all, it is included in the scope. PCI DSS also has payment hardware standards and application standards for the applications that are used. PCI managed accreditations for certified assessors and auditors. I am a certified auditor, and they hold my accreditation. They hold payment application QSA. They hold the PCI Professional, which is the certification I have. They have encryption assessors, qualified security assessors, and forensic investigators, of which they administer testing, qualifications, and if you are looking at acquiring one of these certifications, I will tell you they're pretty hard, but very well worth it. The other thing that I think is great that PCI does is they collect information from users and do conferences and workshops across the world. If you go to the PCI website, it is all free. There is no cost. There is a cost for certifications, but for all of their materials, there is no cost for it. So the Security Standards Council, as I told you before, they provide all the materials for the framework, the tools, the measurements, the support to ensure the safe harboring of credit cards. The PCI DSS, Data Security Standards, focuses on, again, the protection of the cardholder data. The DSS is an actionable framework. It is usable right out of the gate, and it is really robust for credit card data security processes. I could tell you that this framework, as we go through it, can be used across most of your business channels. It could be used for setting up a robust security framework for your whole organization. There are 6 major areas and 12 requirements. Of course, the 12 requirements turn into about 300 processes. And when you implement all of those processes, you will see that you have a great framework. So when we look at the payment card industry standards, I wanted to give you a visualization of what PCI puts together for you. We start with the bigger box, merchant services. PCI DSS is where we're focusing today. But they also provide for software developers a framework, and for manufacturers, they provide a framework for the devices. If you are a software developer, manufacturer, and merchant, you put all this together, you have a perfect combination of a solid security framework. Giving you a visualization of the PCI security standards. These are all of the areas that PCI puts in. Cardholder production, logical production, tokenization is becoming a very prevalent service that credit cards are providing. Then, of course, we have payment data application standards, PIN transactions, point-to-point encryption. A lot of the breaches that have happened are because of a failure in encryption, even in a small microsecond area. When we're talking about a microsecond, it is so fast that it happens, and millions of records are stored. So again, this is something great to go look at the PCI website on. There are hundreds of documents on all of these areas. I'm going to focus for the next part of this presentation on the PCI DSS 12 requirements. You'll see that the framework, I really feel, is almost common sense nowadays inside of building your security framework. So we start off with number 1, build and maintain secure network and systems. Requirement 1, install and maintain a firewall. As you know, firewalls are devices that control computer traffic and allow good data in and out of your organization's network. Of course, you're going to have a firewall to protect your sensitive areas. Firewalls are always set to deny all and then allow only the traffic you want to be and to enter into your sensitive network areas. Requirement 2, do not use vendor supplied defaults. I have done a great amount of audits, and almost every audit that I have done, I have found either a network system or a server that is still using vendor default supplied passwords. Those are easily found on Reddit or public areas. You don't even have to really try to find default username and passwords. It's the easiest way for a hacker to access the internal systems by just using the default passwords or exploits that are based on the default information inside of the servers. Anything that you put on your network before it's physically connected, the default password settings should be changed. It only takes a few minutes if your network is being probed, and most networks are being probed constantly, for a hacker to find a vulnerability of vendor supplied defaults. The next area is protect cardholder data. Again, that sounds very common sense. But in the previous slides, I've shown you how billions of records have been stolen because credit card holder data was not protected. So requirement number 3, protect stored credit card holder data. Credit card holder data should not be stored unless it's absolutely necessary to meet the needs of the business. That is a very easy way to reduce your scope of PCI DSS and keep your organization safe. If you don't have to store it, don't do it. Sensitive data that is on your magnetic strip or the chip of your credit card must never be stored. That is a requirement of PCI. If for some reason your organization has to store the payment account number, or it's also called the PAN, it is critical to render it unreadable. Of course, rendering it unreadable can be through masking, only having the last 4 digits or the first 6 digits of the credit card number, or of course, encryption. If you do, for any reason, store credit card holder data, ensure that you have good monitoring and alerting on the area that you are storing it, so that if there is any anomalous activity, it can be detected right away. Requirement 4 is to encrypt transmission of cardholder data across open networks. We know that many people log on to open Wi-Fi's from home, from places that are not a secure network, and use their credit card. It is the requirement of a place that takes credit card payments to ensure that that transmission is encrypted from end to end. Your mobile devices, if there is an application on your mobile device that takes credit card, this requirement requires that the moment the application comes out, any data that is put in that application is encrypted. It is encrypted the moment it leaves your card until it reaches the merchant bank over the payment card network. Our next grouping of requirements is maintain a vulnerability management program. Again, I really say a lot of this is common sense to standard frameworks, and it doesn't matter the size of your business, something I'll touch a point on later on who has to comply. Maintaining a vulnerability management system is critical. Protect all systems inside your credit card data environment. Use updated antivirus. Antivirus is a requirement of PCI. We have a lot of folks out there that like to write little virus programs to infiltrate your payment card network. I think we're all familiar with the damage that viruses and ransomwares and everything else can do. So protect all systems. You should scan your your credit card data environment with a vulnerability scanner. Store monthly scans. If you are being audited, your QSR, which is a qualified security reviewer would want to see 12 or more consecutive months of vulnerability scans. Now, here's a little tip that I'd like to give you. They are looking for clean vulnerability scans or passing vulnerability scans. It's not just enough to have the scans. You have to have passing scans. Requirement 6, develop and maintain secure systems and applications. All of us, of course, use safe coding methods when we develop our applications. What is the difference between a website and an application? A website contains data to consume, but no transactional methods. So you're just reading off of it. A great example of a website is actually Wikipedia, where there's no transaction that's occurring, but you are just gathering information. But under requirement 7, you have to develop your applications and be trained annually on secure coding and methodology. Requirement 7 is strong access control. And I'll run through this rather quickly here. Restrict access to least privilege and need to know. That is, in every system that you should have strong access controls. Always use least privilege. The day of the super user is over. No one needs access to everything. Requirement 8, authenticate access to every system. Multi-factor authentication these days is critical. Multi-factor is not just having 2 passwords or 2 logons. You look for a ID password and then a token of some sort of logging on. And requirement 9, restrict physical access. Your CDE servers and everything should be in a data center that is in a secure place, that is auditable, that have racks that lock, that have multi-factor authentication to even get into your data center. If someone is able to get onto a physical machine with a console, all of the other requirements we have are gone. Regularly monitor and test networks. Test. So requirement 10, track all testing, keep logs of all mechanisms. Hopefully you have a SIM in place where you're receiving all the logs, but regularly test your network and your data. Regularly test. Your organization will define what regularly test is. If you're a retailer, level 1 retailer, you are going to test probably weekly. If you're a level 3 or 4, you might test monthly or quarterly, but the key is constantly test. And last of their requirements is maintain an information security policy. Again, you might be thinking, yes, this is common sense, but it's not just writing a policy down. It's creating a policy and making sure that all people that are working within your CDE understand the policy and understand their components of the policy. So who has to comply? Well, there are certain levels that have been created for telling you exactly who has to comply and what you have to do. Level 1, the highest, if you're processing over 6 million Visa or MasterCard transactions per year, you must comply with everything that PCI does. You're also required to engage a qualified security auditor and complete an official report of compliance. PCI compliance level 2, 3, and 4 you're required to complete a self-assessment and submit to your your merchant bank. But no matter what level you're at, you are required to complete quarterly network scans. What do we do now? So the first thing to know is the safest way to know what level of compliance that you need is the bank is telling your organization what you need. All of organizations that take credit card have a merchant bank, and that bank will tell you what they want from you. They will tell you what your organization needs to provide in order to attest that they are compliant. What is in scope? Any system that stores, processes, or transmits credit card data, and as I said before, even for a few milliseconds. Any system that is directly connected to your cardholder data environment. You should have a great diagram, mapping, and know every piece of your credit card data environment. You don't want to miss a single piece. Okay, so you find out that, oh, I need to be PCI compliant. What do I do? Where do I start? I have worked with organizations that have never done PCI compliance, have done some PCI compliance. Absolute best thing to do is start with a gap analysis. Where are you now? What changes does the organization need to bring? And where you need to be. From that, create a great action plan. As a hint, if you go to the PCI website, they actually have a pre-made PCI plan that is there for you to use to create your action plan for being PCI compliant. How do we get it done? First one, know all the stakeholders. If I had to stress one piece, it is know the stakeholders. The stakeholders are business, technology, and external entities that have any type of impact on your cardholder data environment. Make sure you involve the business. The IT department, the security department, the audit department cannot do it alone. The business knows how and where cards are used. One point to stress is PCI now requires a charter for services provided. That's a new piece for this year. Identify all the materials that you need. Process those quarterly scans. Process the quarterly scans. Save them. Remember, scans have to be passing. Define and document your scope of your environment. Perform your gap analysis. Set priorities. I have been asked this on several occasions. Why comply? PCI is not a governing agency that requires you to report to them. You report to your bank. If you do not comply, card brands that require PCI to be compliant are you no longer will be able to accept or issue their card brands. Think if you're a big retailer, it's Christmas time, and you cannot accept Visa cards. Banks require merchants to be PCI compliant. So the bank will require a merchant to be compliant, not PCI. And merchants should always make sure that third parties are compliant. Let's talk about some common issues. Number one, improper scope. Your scope for PCI requires all of the systems, people, processes, technology to handle cardholder data. The key word there is all. Even the security systems that are monitoring your cardholder data environment are required to be included in your PCI audit. Another one is failure to resolve vulnerabilities on a timely basis. I've seen in times where, yeah, I have 12 months of vulnerability scans and they all fail. As soon as you do a vulnerability scan, which is why I recommend weekly, fix those vulnerabilities right away. Patch those vulnerabilities right away. Patching for anything that's critical should be done no more than 30 days out of its release. Of course, I like to see 15 days out. The pitfall, failure to audit access to the cardholder data environment. You want to go over who has access to your cardholder data environment on a very frequent basis, 30, 90 days at most. Who has access, and take away access to anybody that doesn't need. And yes, failure to change vendor default configurations. I think I said that enough to you before. Failing to review audit logs. You might have a great SIM, but if nobody's actually looking at it, you're going to find a lot of areas in there that were missed. And of course, custom built applications, make sure developers are fully aware. If you are not compliant and you fail your audit, your organization can be fined. But if you experience a security breach involving credit card data and you are not PCI compliant, there will be heavy fines, enhanced scrutiny. And what I mean by enhanced scrutiny is you might have to do a quarterly audit for many years. Target right now is under enhanced scrutiny. They have to do quarterly audits, and audits are very expensive. Increased fees. Your credit card merchant charges a fee for every transaction. If you are not compliant and you have a breach, they will increase the fees. And of course, lawsuits. So we want to be PCI compliant. In here, I have listed a bunch of glossary terms that I am not going to read for you today, but please feel free to go through them. And then I thank you for sitting through the presentation. I would now open it up to questions for anybody in the audience.